OpenClaw without Notion is 40 automations with nowhere to go, 5 databases, $30 a month, and OpenClaw finally working on the way it's supposed to. That's the data spine. Let me show you the setup. By the end of this, you'll see exactly why OpenClaw crons without a Notion backend are just working blind. I'm gonna walk you through the 5 databases that make up the data spine and the 15 API integration that connects them and this week's actual numbers. If your automation setup has no memory, this is the fix. All right, so most people use Notion like a fancy notes app. They have a content calendar, they manually update on Fridays, maybe a task list, maybe a page full of links, and then never go back to it. And that's fine. That's just Notion as a documentation tool. But Notion as a relational database is something completely different, and most people who use OpenClaw never make that connection. The first half of the data spine is already built into the tool. You're just not using it yet. Here is the content hub. This is where all my content for the week, whether it's short form or long form YouTube content goes. Everything gets scheduled here, everything gets drafted here. So this is kind of how I have it for long form, but for short form, something similar. Headline, script, and then just other metadata like YouTube description. So what I call the content hub is where everything is held together in just one row per piece with platform, script status, publish date, and source here. Then the idea base, like I mentioned, that's really a live feed of the potential topics. I also have something called the engagement database, and this is something that I use mainly for my OpenClaw to refer to. So this is right here, the engagement database. Here I have just different people I should be engaging with across different platforms. I also have competitors, people I should be looking into. Like for example, if I chose an idea from the idea base, it would reference it in the source instead of a link. Otherwise, if it pulls it from an actual article, I have an actual article in there. And so why Notion specifically? Maybe you use something else and you can use something like Obsidian. But for me specifically, Notion, I've used it for over a few years now. And the API is stable, it's quick, and documentation is clean. There's a lot of support and it's $10 a month. You don't have to pay $10, but I have the automation features. And you're also not gonna have to pay for Airtable's per seat pricing. Notion is that sweet spot that gives you a relational database system, a web interface for reviewing and editing records when you want, and full API for automated writes with your OpenClaw. All of it, and just $10 a month. You would go in settings, and then you would go to connections. And I'm not going to open this, but you would just go into browse, develop, or manage integrations. And from there, you'll be able to generate an API key, give that to your OpenClaw, or use it via the terminal. You can configure it, and if you have no idea how to do that, just ask Claude or your OpenClaw how to do it, and they'll give you the command to copy and paste your key in the terminal, and you'll just do it that way. Here's a more visual representation of how Notion comes into play, and then all these other sub databases and how I interact with my OpenClaw. But here's the thing that makes it all real. When I open Notion on a Friday for my weekly review, I'm not updating anything. I'm just reading the content hub, and it already has 14 rows for shorts, 2 for long form, all created since Monday. And the engagement database already has 22 comment opportunities logged, the suggested replies for them. But the social media drafts is something that I use occasionally. If I get an idea, I just jot it down, or I ask my OpenClaw Eries to just drop it in there, and we're good to go. The cool part about having all of this is that I'm not really typing into this stuff anymore, like any of these throughout the week. That's what the data spine looks like. If you open a fresh Notion workspace today, none of that happens. These databases do not fill themselves, and Notion has no way to generate its own data or run automated tasks. And that's exactly why we need the second half. So if you watched any of Alex Finn's videos on OpenClaw, you probably know what it does. Crons, agents, AI tasks, they're running 24/7 on your machine. And Alex demos mission control. He's built custom HTML dashboards and everything. And that's genuinely impressive. But the question I kept asking after watching those videos was, where is the data going? When I first set up OpenClaw, I did what most people do. I built crons for everything I needed. A content research cron at 7 a.m. pulling records for trending topics, an engagement cron to build my comment list, a competitor tracker they're running every Friday, and they all worked and they all produced decent outputs. Some of them didn't, but for the first few weeks, it felt like I actually figured out the automation game. And then one day I went back and looked at my Discord server, which was the default destination for most of my crons results. And I saw something I hadn't expected. I saw 12 weeks of competitor research data just sitting on the Discord channel, 12 weeks of the competitor cron running every Friday, dropping its output into the message and never going back to read it. And that's 12 weeks of work fully captured but completely invisible. And that's the limitation. OpenClaw is not designed to be a database. It has a memory for context within a session, but structural, relational, queryable storage across runs, that's not what it does. The cron runs the task, you decide where it outputs it, and if you build it with the destination for it, the data lives in a log or a message. And if you don't build a destination for it, the data just lives in a log or a message channel that effectively just disappears. You've automated the work, you just haven't automated the memory. So this is what, like, a list of like 30 plus crons, some of them with no persistent storage, and every cron is an island, right? The content cron doesn't know what the engagement cron found. The competitor tracker doesn't know what's in the lead pipeline. They all run in parallel, they produce good individual outputs, and none of them can actually build on each other's work because there's no shared memory. I just genuinely couldn't tell you what data I had generated over the previous month. It was all logs and Discord channels, technically captured, practically invisible, and it was a mess. And I had Notion sitting right there, already set up with all 7 databases, completely empty and waiting. And I had the plan, I had the brain, and I had the hands, and I had not connected them. So there's this GitHub intelligence cron. It goes to GitHub and it scrapes interesting repos that I would find interesting. And it tries to find like agent files or workflows. Or what I'm doing now is my shorts cron now understands to look at that database. And so instead of either trying to teach it to look for GitHub stuff, I can just say, hey, look at this database from the GitHub intelligence cron. And that's what I'm starting to do with a lot of the crons is instead of having more, I'm having less, but more specialized. They all existed, they just weren't talking to each other. And all it was going to take to connect them was a few lines of code. And here's a description of like with and without Notion. You can see that output is just scattered and its own island, no memory, can't query the results. And then here's is with Notion, you have somewhere to write to, and you have all 5 databases linked relationally, and every run has a queryable role. But here's what neither tool does alone. Notion can store anything, but it cannot generate on its own data, and it cannot run automations. OpenClaw can run any automation, but it has no structural relational database to keep what it builds across runs. But if you put Notion and OpenClaw together, you get a system that generates data and it persists in a queryable format that links across multiple databases. And that's not a feature of Notion, that's not a feature of OpenClaw. That's just when they work together, and that's the data spine. The integration is a Notion API call inside the cron. When the cron finishes a job, it calls Notion API, passes the database ID to the right database, and it writes a new record in a structure with structured fields already mapped. And the content cron creates a page in the content hub with title, platform, script, status, source, idea, and the status. Basically, all these columns you see populated, they were actually generated a few days ago. This is really the bread and butter of like the database I use every single week without fail, if not multiple times a week, as I'm generating content, reviewing it, updating it. Because once I have this, I use the data and everything to schedule it. Any sources that I need to pull up as I'm recording, I use that. I'm asking my OpenClaw, like, to give you an example of how we query with the Notion, how the shorts cron queries Notion. As you can see right here, here's the actual query. So this is what your OpenClaw would do. It would type this to find the right page and this to write in, with Notion. It works in blocks. So all these are considered blocks. And so there's a specific way that we figured out to write with the API, and that's what works for us. But there's also specific filtering. So Erie's knows for shorts. So the shorts cron will have a specific query to automatically say shorts and by specific status. The code is generally not complicated. The hardest part is just the schema mapping into your first cron. But that just takes a little bit of iteration. Once you build that mapping once, every other cron just copies the same pattern. I've run into issues where Erie's gets it wrong, and I'm like, hey, can you just check the short cron, copy that, and we're good to go. And here's the thing, actual numbers is 16 in my content hub, which includes 14 shorts and 2 long form records that we create throughout the week. Engagement has 22 across multiple platforms. And competitors, of course, has 8. And all of this, Notion costs $10 a month, 10 to 12 bucks a month. So my total cost is actually about 30 bucks, 20 to 30 bucks a month with all of this, using Notion and using OpenClaw. These are all my records for shorts. So this is the content that I'm recording for this week. And each one is tagged properly with source, which I use when I'm talking about a specific video. I want to pull it up and have it on the screen. All right, so I've been saying a lot, but if this has been helpful so far, hit that button because it helps a lot with this video to help it reach more people. And so just about 3 months ago, just running the data spine, I opened Notion on a Friday afternoon, and I realized that I hadn't typed a single thing of any of these databases. There's not one manual entry, not one. Mainly the Content Hub is the most impressive part for me. That's what saves me the most time, because I'm not stuck spending hours generating scripts anymore. Minutes add up to hours every single week. I will say, if you want to build something like this for yourself, just start with one cron. Keep it simple. Don't try to build like 5 databases at once. Just pick your highest signal for data. For most people, that's probably content or leads, and build that first connection. The moment you see how a row appears in Notion from a cron you didn't manually trigger, you'll understand why this changes how the whole system feels, and the rest takes a weekend. You're able to move at a speed that you could never before. I put them all together for about $30 a month. You stop updating your business and start just reviewing stuff. $47 in lifetime revenue, building this live in public with no team and no shortcuts. And if you want to watch someone build this from nothing, newsletter link is in the description. Thanks so much for watching.